Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar series. During today's webinar, you are able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers, along with the webinar recording, will be published a week from today's date. And today we have CMDB Configuration Dashboard and Troubleshooting Techniques. Manish Patel and Gustavo de Gerbo will take us through this content. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. I'm Manish Patel, working with the BMC over 10 years. During my tenure, I have worked in core R&D and now with a Platinum Engineering Group, helping customers to be successful with the BMC solutions. Right. Today, Gustavo and I are going to cover a very interesting topic, our CMDB Configuration Dashboard. We call it Neo UI as well, when we have a Flex UI also still there. Which will be sunsetting by end of this year. In this webinar today, we will have a quick overview about CMDB configuration dashboard. What is this, the path ahead? We're gonna also share how new UI communicates with the backend AR server, which will kind of help you understand how the communication, how the interaction really flows. We will also make you familiar with the troubleshooting process, which will cover our different logs and tools. To start with our configuration manager dashboard, right? Before I go and talk about our new UI, let me kind of give you the little background around it. You all know that our Adobe Flash will be sunset at the end of 2020, and many browsers will cease support of Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and Firefox, right, are some of them. We are on a journey to remove these technologies from our various solutions, and one of the biggest changes has been in our CMDB UI, where the Flash-based Atrium core console. Now our updated CMDB UI is based on HTML and Angular technologies. If you haven't checked the new UI, I think it's a great time to get deeper into it, and you can get started with our documentation. Working on this whole technology replacement project, what we have been also looking at ways to not only replace existing functionality, but also to reimagine how the CMDB is managed, and making the most of it, the opportunities has been given to us. CMDB UI has given more actionable insights through KPIs into data accuracy as well as completeness. We also have a CMDB class manager, Atrium Explorer, and other CMDB integration components with a more intuitive UI. On this journey, we have a few more UI components to cover, which are coming in the August release. This includes the missing activities of Reconciliation Engine functionality. Now, so far in our Reconciliation Engine, we had identification, merge, and purge activities covered. So you will see more activities which are similar to what we had in Flex Console. We also have dynamic service modeling functionality to our new UI. Replacing the CMDB audit UI to be much more aligned with the new framework, and federation capabilities. You will also see more functionalities into Atrium Integrator. I want to let you know that our service catalog UI is not actually replaced in this whole CMDB UI framework. We are still working on our approach, and you will hear more in our future. Product catalog UI will still be same, and there is no change in that UI mode. So now let's deep dive into how UI communicates with the backend. In this architecture overview slide, let's deep dive into AR server section first, and then we'll go and look at how the communication flows. As you all know, or you may know, that AR server from 9.0 is OSGI container based. That actually enables you to load or unload any package without restarting AR server. Right. CMDB engine is one of them. You will see this package has been under file system where deploy, and then there is a different jar files or packages are there located. Jetty is also, Jetty is also one of the OSGI package, and that actually enables this whole REST-based communication. We have other packages which are also been supporting this whole UI as well as REST layer, CMDB and AR REST layer. Is CMDB UI, CMDB widget, and then we have AR and CMDB REST API specific packages as well, right? So any request which comes from the browser, that will have a AR server hostname and a port. For Jetty, the port is 8008. It's a default port. For any communication that happens, which will also have which particular package to load. So this request goes to a Jetty, and then Jetty will decide which package to load for a particular request execution. For a UI package, there is a if you look at the URL, you will see after port /CMDB or a lib, which will go and load a particular CMDB UI packages and then complete that execution. When it comes to a REST API request, that will start with the API, AR or CMDB. It depends on which REST API it is. And that will load and execute a particular request by respective package on the server side. So now let's look at the little deeper into it, how the communication flows, right? As we saw that most of the REST communication that happens, the first of all request goes to a Jetty. Now, how Jetty actually intercepts and how the authentication authorization happens. Let's look at the high level how it works. In this, whenever any request actually goes to a Jetty, first of all, it intercepts all the requests, whether and then understands where and how to process it further. In a Jetty, first of all, request goes, it will check if there is any JWT token, which is called a JSON web token, right? And that token is important to know whether this request is already as a authenticated user or it needs to be authenticated. So if it doesn't have a JWT token, then it will also look at for some RSSO session ID or this info, which is based on RSSO as well as Jetty integration, right? If it's not there, then it will go and send the request back to a respective RSSO server to get that one authenticated, and then request will go further. Now, there is another component on this where it will also intercepts all the requests, which will also retrieve all the authentication or authenticated information like authenticated token and other information. It will populate into and then load the context object, and then it will kind of send this context object for a further processing. At this layer, if there is no authentication token available, then it sends that request back to the login page to get the use or the request authenticated and then continue the processing. When there is any request which has a /API, which means as a REST API, it will go and check. It will review the context object, which was actually created in the previous step, and then honor the authorization presented by it, right? And then all the permissions and roles will be applied on it. And then request actually goes to the respective package for further processing. Now let's look at it how end-to-end REST flow really works, right? We looked at it, the architecture, how it communicates. We also looked at it, what exactly happens at the Jetty layer, right? Now let's look at it, how the request flows, right? So whenever you open up our CMDB Configuration Dashboard UI, right? There is you will see once you open up the browser or the developer tools on the browser, you will see a lot of request information is kind of flowing from browser. to the backend server, and request response are flowing, right? And you will see this is one of the top calls that it makes. And the first call is about the getting the JWT token, right? Which is a JSON web token that actually tells your user has been getting authenticated, and you have a valid token been sent back to the browser, right? This token will be then send it over as a part of the request to each and every in the REST API call, right? So, and when you are looking at this info, right, the second call that you can see on the screen, where it will ask for the list of classes on a CMDB, and then this request actually again goes to the Jetty. It will say, yes, there is a valid JWT token is there. Then it will pass that request further to the CMDB services, which actually executes your the REST API. You will see this information if you turn on the CMDB service log. You will see how the information is getting executed, and then the response is going back to the REST API call. When it comes to understanding the communication, and after that, how can we make a use of into troubleshooting, right? You will visualize all this communication by turning on the different logs, right? And the UI is much more, I would say, simpler in a way, but at the same time, if you know which logs to look at it helps you even further, right? Browser log, RSSO logs, Jetty logs, these are the different logs will actually help you to trace from request then the response back to the browser itself. To start with, whenever any request goes, you have a browser logs to look at it, where you can say my REST API calls you can trace, as well as JavaScript logs. We'll have a more information covered in this logs, and how to turn on those logs as well. That information is there in the troubleshooting section. So when this request actually flows, right, these are the logs will help you to understand what request really went out from the browser side to the server, and what response you really got back, right? Where it goes on the next step is about CMDB service log, the REST API information. What API got really received at the CMDB service level, and how you can really see what the response went back. So these logs will be very important to review when you see there is a communication is not really happening between your browser to the CMDB server. We have other logs as well, especially around the authentication side, where we have experience. RSSO log as well as Jetty logs will be very helpful, because that's where that handshake happens. And if there is any authentication issues then this logs will help you even further dive into understanding the root cause of it. Once my authentication is done, once we know that CMDB service is executing, right, you can have a further log to look at into CMDB engine log, as well as AR server API SQL filter log. CMDB engine log actually captures more about the graph API as well as QBP. When it goes to the AR server, it covers the other CMDB, like a CMDB get list instance, create instance, those calls, as well as AR API call and SQL information. That actually gives you a further deep dive into what exactly got executed by AR server and what really went to the SQL server. The SQL Server or Oracle, whichever database you may have. If it's taking time or why it is taking time, and you can debug it further. In this slide, we want to cover a little, before we go into a troubleshooting section, we want to cover a bit more here it's more as a kind of, I would say, as a refresher. We all may know already about what this HTTP is, which is a kind of very standard way of communication between web client and web server, right? And what is the meaning of different status code, right? So just to kind of, it's a more as a refresher. If you know, I think just kind of sit and relax. This message, I mean, this particular the communication, right? The communication happens, and then it has the server response that we get. It has actually three parts. One is HTTP. It has a HTTP version information, right? What exactly status code, and then short description on that status code itself. So there are actually different codes are here. We may not really need to know each and every, because whenever you have some issue, you will go and find that information from internet easily, right? But there are some codes will be very helpful, and those are actually listed on the right side. 200, okay, that's always a happy path. You'll be all happy to see 200 all the time, right? There will be other codes as well. One common we have seen is a 404 not found, where either my server is not up or not configured properly. My server side, the request is going into the wrong server or improperly configured server. You may see 404 error very, very commonly, right? So just to kind of keep this one, once you understand this part, I think that's all. We don't have to do much again. We don't have to know for each and every code what does that mean. But if you know kind of very commonly used, that should be good enough, right? So now we will do a deep dive on the troubleshooting side, and let me hand it over to my colleague Gustavo, who will cover the troubleshooting section as well as he will do a demo before that. And then we will have a dashboard data generate utility and some troubleshooting part as well.
Well, thank you, Manish. Hi, everyone. This is Gustavo from Platinum Engineering. I've been working on the CMDB for the last 12 years, and some of you may know me from BMC communities. Today, we'll look at a demo to help us troubleshoot issues in the new UI by using a very simple tool that is already included in all our browsers. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is bring up the developer tools from our browser. So in case of Chrome browser, you can do F12, or just go to the options and more tools, developer tools. And that will bring up this window here that will allow us to do some troubleshooting and some understanding of what's going on at the CMDB dashboard level. So let me clear this up. And I can see in the network tab, which is the main tab we're going to use, all the calls that are going through from the browser to the different servers and URLs. Now, to start our debugging, I can go to the classes tab here under class management, and we'll see in the developer tools here what happens. Okay, so the class manager is opening up. I can see the transfer here of resources and the browser getting data to display on the screen. So one thing we can do to narrow down the calls here, because we don't have to see all the calls, we don't need all this to troubleshoot, we can click on XHR here, and it will somehow filter the number of calls and give us the calls we are really interested in, which are the REST API calls. So in this case, I can see that, first of all, this API was triggered, this classes with display info. So I can see the full URL here, API CMDB B10 UI classes with display info. And if I go to preview, it will give me all the information that got all the response, the full response. This is a JSON response, but the browser is kind enough to actually make it look nice so that we can actually understand the output, right? So I can see all my classes here, each and every one, right? So this is very nice. And there's another call, which is a different kind of API call, and this is a classes call, BMC core, BMC base element. Full class definition true. The reason why this call was made was, first of all, you need to get all the classes. Of course, to show me the class manager, but at the same time, it needed to display the information here on the right. So it needed the full base element information. Now, if I go and swap here to base relationship, I go back to the network tab and I can see a different call happen here, which is now for base relationship. Okay. Now I go back to the dashboard here, and if I look at the developers tools, there's a bunch of calls that happen, and this is the troubleshooting information that we need. For example, this one is marked in red because it got an error, right? I can see it was an AI jobs last run info call. Something happened that this call didn't make it through. So if I go to the preview, I can see an error. If I open that error, I can see exactly what happened. So in this case, cannot establish a network connection to the system plugin server. And in the appended text, it will tell me exactly which server it tried to connect and which plugin port it was. So all this information is very useful. Actually, I can pick up this API call and I can use Postman or Swagger to run this API and see what happens. And I can get all type of useful information from these API calls. Okay, so we're back from the demo, and I'll show you another mechanism to troubleshoot REST APIs by using a third-party tool called Postman. Postman can execute REST API calls and show the responses. If you're using the RSSO, you will need to disable RSSO for Postman call to go through directly to the remedy server. To do this, we can open the RSSO agent properties and exclude a specific pattern from the configuration file. In case of a server group, the change has to be done only on the server where you're pointing your Postman calls. And once you open this file, you'll find this excluded URL pattern, and you can add this little property at the end of the string. After that, you'll be able to use Postman without RSSO. Now, another option we have is to exclude or shut down the RSSO agent, and this sometimes can make it easier to identify the problem. If we suspect that RSSO may be playing a role in the issue at hand, this will allow us to disable the RSSO filter and our calls to go directly to remedy. By following a similar mechanism as we did with Postman, we can use the same file, the RSSO agent properties file, to skip the filter, use this property, set it to true, and this will make the REST APIs to go directly to AR server for authentication. Another option we have here is to change the application URL patterns, exclude our patterns from the RSSO agent so that our application calls also go directly to the server. And finally, another tool we have is the Swagger UI. The Swagger UI will show you a list of the endpoints, the REST API endpoints in a web page. There you can read and submit requests after authentication. Default values for all the parameters will be automatically populated, making it easier to make a REST API call. Now, Swagger UI can be accessed through a direct URL. You can put up the HTTPS, the host name, the port number of your remedy server, CMDB API help HTML, and you will have to provide an authentication token in the HTTP header. This is required for all the requests of the REST API. So clicking on the authorize button in the upper right corner of the Swagger UI, it will display the available authorizations dialog box, and you can specify a token there. Now we'll show you more details about this on the following demo. So as I mentioned, in this demo, we'll go through the Swagger UI and how you can enable the authentication of the Swagger UI to make your REST API calls. This demo will be presented by Amit Garg, one of our team members. So thank you, Amit.
This is Swagger UI. Here in the browser window, I have put the host name, port number, and the URL to access Swagger UI. So here we can see we can have this many REST calls over here. But before doing the operations, what we need to do is we need to authorize the Swagger UI. So for the authorization button, we need to click on the authorize button over here, and here we need to put the value over here. So value is nothing but it's a token that we need to pass. It's JSON web token over here. So right now, what we need to do is like we need to get the token from somewhere and put it over here. So there are two ways to get a token. One is like we can use Postman, and in the Postman we will just call the post method and use the API JWT login API, and we will put the username and password for that system from where we wish to create a token, and then we will just send that request. And after that we will get one token over here, and we need to copy that token and need to put that value over here and click on the authorize. So once it is authorized, then we can just perform any of the operations that we need to do or with the REST calls. And yeah, it's authorized now. So, and there's other way to get a token is we can use a new CMDB UI, and it's a login page of new CMDB, and I need to open the developers tool also. I will open that side by side. Here I need to put the username and password and sign in. And if I go to the developer tools, then I will see in the network tab, these are REST calls. Here we will see there's a login REST API call. The login API calls is nothing but the same call that we did from the Postman. Here in the response, we will get a token also. So we can generate a token from here also and put that in the Swagger UI to authenticate. Another thing is like how we need to use the Swagger UI. So here we have the list of REST API calls. So whatever we need to use, we need to click on that. Like I'm clicking over here. So if I wish to perform the get operation to list down the summary information, so I will open that. Here, these are the parameters that I can pass, but these are not in bold, so these are not mandatory to pass. So I will simply click on the try it out. Yeah. After this, yeah, the response body is having the information, and I have status code 200 means it's successful. So in the similar way, you can use any of the REST API call in the similar way. So you need to click on that and can use any of the operation. Accordingly, the parameters will be shown over there, which you can use and put the values, corresponding values over there. Thank you.
We are back from the demo, and we'll give you an introduction on the CMDB Dashboard data generator. This is a new feature in the UI. So it's a visual indicator of the overall health of the CMDB at any given time. As a configuration manager, you can configure the integrity and completeness key performance indicators to monitor the health of your CMDB. The integrity KPI captures the orphan CIs and duplicate CIs in a data source. The completeness KPI captures if a CI has any missing attributes. It is an indicator of the quality of data in the CMDB. Now, to view the KPIs on the CMDB dashboard, you can use the tooltips for integrity and completeness KPIs to view health results rather than having to drill down inside the dashboard utility for information. The tooltip for the integrity KPIs show the classes that have been excluded for calculating integrity and the number of CIs included in each of those classes. Now, similarly, the tooltip for the completeness KPI shows the classes and its associated CIs that were excluded for calculating completeness. Now, under the data flow section, now here on the right, you can click data sources to view the details of the classes and datasets that were excluded for data source utility processing. The dashboard component displays different values, such as the number of failed and normalized CIs, the number of data sources, and so on. Right? These values are not generated at runtime, but every run of the dashboard utility and data sources utility. So it's done on schedule, basically. So BMC recommends that you schedule this utility for off-peak hours to avoid an adverse impact on the system performance, and also to avoid overlapping of schedules for both the utility. You must have a minimum difference of 1 hour between the schedules. Right, so let's look at the configuration options we have for this dashboard data generator. So the utility provides us with different options for configuration. On the CMDB UI, you can go first to your configurations, configure dashboard parameters, and configure dashboard and data sources. And here you can specify the classes to be excluded for processing KPIs and data sources. Now, under configuration, configure dashboard parameters, configure completeness, you can specify the attributes that would be counted for completeness. Note that these changes will take effect when the dashboard utility runs the next time, right? So finally, the dashboard utility refresh cycle can be scheduled on the CMDB UI from the configurations, configure dashboard parameters, configure schedule. It is recommended, like I said before, to give 1 to 2 hours space between schedules to provide sufficient time for the first run to complete before starting the second one. Now, what about the logging of this utility? So in cases where we need to analyze logs of these utility runs, we can find those logs inside the Atrium Core logs folder. Here we can find descriptions of every error found and will help us understand what happened. Each run will produce a file with a GUID on it. And optionally, we can manually run the utility as well to force an update or to debug further. A very common issue here in the dashboard is that the utility doesn't run properly or at the time we expect it. So even after setting the proper schedules for the utility, we do not see any data in the graphs. For this issue, a simple solution is to check the command file that runs the utility and verify the Java path is correct. Once the Java path is corrected, we can either run the utility manually to double check, or we can wait until the next scheduled time. Another common issue for reconciliation and normalization engine is related to a new feature added to the new UI. This feature involves reconciliation and normalization processes to note every single error during execution in a form called CMDB job run info. We noticed that if the cleanup mechanism for this form is not working properly, the form can easily build up with a lot of records and affect the performance of these applications. So for this, we recommend to monitor this form and delete the records as necessary.
Now, a good summary checklist for any UI issue includes: first, to ensure the CMDB UI is properly configured. In the references later, we will provide you a very useful link that goes through this process. Next, you can check if Jetty is up and running. This is easy to identify by checking the error log as well as the Jetty log. In the same logs, you can determine if there was any issues loading the REST API engine. So another source of information for this check is also in the CMDB services log. Finally, you can check if the RSSO agent and the server are running and if the CMDB is properly integrated. There are several logs that can help you with this, including the RSSO agent as well as the RSSO server logs. Now, for each component, you have several logs as indicated and different troubleshooting techniques. For example, for authentication issues with RSSO integrated, you can check the RSSO agent and server logs, the browser logs, the Jetty logs, and finally, you can also use the technique explained before to disable the RSSO and ensure that the issue is in the integration of the RSSO itself and not in the particular application. For dashboard-related issues, you can use the logs mentioned before. You can check the Java path of the command file as well as the 2 backend forms that hold important data for this utility. And finally, for other components of the UI, you're going to need the browser logs, CMDB services logs, CMDB engine debug logs, error logs, and sometimes, if needed, a component-specific debug log. So that concludes my part. Back to you, Manish.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. So here you can find some references to configuring the new UI features, some UI setup, RSSO agent integration, how to gather browser logs effectively, obtain SSO logs, as well as REST API logs. So in this webinar, let's review what we covered so far. We have covered our CMDB dashboard UI and what is the plan ahead, what is at least coming in a couple of months, what are the new enhancements are coming up. How new UI communicates with the backend engine, and we also reviewed architecture, which gives you some understanding and helps you with the troubleshooting aspect. We also capture some information about what are the different logs are required to troubleshoot There are different tools like a Postman and Swagger UI were also reviewed, and there are different techniques. We also learned about dashboard data generator tool, which actually works the backend, but is very important to understand and capture the information about KPI and dashboard. Okay. So with that, let me hand it over to the Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. I'll take us through the self-help and contacting BMC, our YouTube channel where this webinar, along with other webinars and a rich set of how-to videos, is available. The Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar schedule is available at this community's link. It has future webinars as well as our past webinars. And the Hot Off the Press newsletter that contains trending information is available at this community's link. To contact BMC technical support via web, phone, email, or these social channels. And this will conclude our webinar. Again, this will be posted a week from today's presentation. Thank you for joining.